Humans make mistakes, and mistakes make us human. We try to learn from our wrongdoings and hope that we don't end up the same way. However, often things don't go as planned, and we forget the lessons. It's even worse for business executives, since their repeated mistakes bring direct impact to their companies and their stakeholders. Why do business leaders repeat their mistakes? And, most vitally, how do we prevent that from happening? In this seminar, Professor S. Tamer Cavusgil, Executive Director of the Center for International Business Education and Research at Georgia State University, shares his research by investigating the reasons why senior executives come up with the wrong decisions over and over. Professor Cavusgil will cover perspectives such as cognitive science and bias, and offer solutions to companies and their management on how to avoid making and repeating mistakes in the business world.
In global business today, it's clear that we have a wealth of knowledge at our fingertips. It's no exaggeration to say that executives have ready access to books, university courses, workshops, mentors, all telling them how to do their jobs right. On the other hand, we still have the puzzle. I would say this is a puzzle of repeat mistakes. Executives making the same mistakes that they made before in their companies or themselves. That's always puzzling, and I can give you many examples of that. I'm sure you can think of many examples, especially in the past. If you look back and say that, well, this was a dumb action on behalf of the company or on behalf of the executive. So we see a lot of these repeat mistakes. So this is puzzling. Despite all the knowledge and wisdom that business people are supposed to have, many managers are still making the same mistakes time and again. In some cases, managers are taking actions that would question and characterize as missteps, not just in hindsight, but actions doomed to failure from the outset. Over the course of implementation, they turn out to be oversights, wrong choices, or simply disasters, and embarrassing also for the company, loss of reputation sometimes, but also embarrassing for the executives involved. In some instances, managers are repeating their own mistakes. In other words, they're doing the same wrong thing, expecting a different result. In such a scenario, management takes the wrong step and surprisingly later returns to the same mistake, ignoring its earlier failure. So in preparation for today's remarks, I thought long and hard about what it is that causes executives not just make mistakes, but repeat them. A couple of colleagues and myself, we approached this project in the following way. First of all, we discussed among ourselves, looking at the evidence. Many cases, my discipline is international business, so we were looking at, for example, companies going into new markets and failing, but then coming back and failing again, time and time again. So we looked at some of those cases. We also looked at the business literature, especially applied literature. For example, McKinsey quarterly publications of management consulting companies and so on. And we've gotten some insights. Then we asked ourselves, well, what does the cognitive science say about these mistakes that humans, not just executives, but we all make them and make them repeatedly? So why is it that we are not learning from our mistakes? And this new field for us, we come from business, psychology, cognitive science was new, was instructive. It turned up a host of psychological or what we can call heuristic reasons or biases that we all share. Then, thirdly, we turn to our advisory council, senior business executives, seasoned executives, and ask them the same question. why they think we come across these repeat mistakes. We learned a lot from them as well. Then, together with my two colleagues, did the last step, which we surveyed senior executives across different geographies and different industries. More than 120 responses we've got. So we've got some hard evidence as well. So today, I'll be sharing with you what we learned from this series of steps, from cognitive science, what we heard from the business advisors, as well as what our survey of global business executives have showed up. But before we dive into the results of my investigation, it's worth considering, are these mistakes entirely new, or do patterns change depending upon the time period or cultural context? We all know that executives messing up is not something new. Throughout my career as a business educator, I have witnessed these mistakes firsthand many times, and no doubt that you have also observed them and wondered about these missteps. And it's also something not unique to any one culture or geography or ethnic background. Granted, some countries may be better at building successful international business, but no culture is immune from mistakes either. So we asked, first of all, our executives, what causes these repeat mistakes? Is it because of the contemporary business environment, modern, interconnected, complex, volatile, uncertain, and certainly very risky, often disruptions that we have to deal with? We listened to them very carefully. We looked at the evidence also, various cases. And from these cases, especially the ones that involve international business and new market entry, we find that managers need to carefully assess and adapt to the unique dynamics. So we find that when companies enter new markets, this is something that they overlooked. Especially we've seen this with the U.S. Business executives, underestimating the difficulties of a new market and assuming that the market conditions are the same, whether it's competition or consumer expectations or involvement of government. Walmart, for example, coming to Germany several times, failing each time, finally abandoning. Best Buy coming to China several times and failing, especially in retail. And it's very difficult, we find, for retailers to take their success formula at home to another environment and replicate that success. For a variety of reasons I can explain, for example, consumer expectations, competitive considerations, supply chain issues, and so on, that doesn't seem to be working well. One of the things we asked ourselves, is it irrational to repeat failed actions? Is there any rationale, any good reason why these mistakes may be happening? So we did a little bit of research, and we came across this phenomenon of equifinality, the concept of equifinality. This is the phenomenon of doing the same but expecting a different result. And it's already been researched and well established, and it works like a rationale why we see these repeat mistakes so often. Equifinality refers to the idea that a given endpoint can be achieved through different initial conditions or processes. So there's the expectation on the part of the individual. There are multiple viable paths to a desired outcome. Thus, repeated attempts in a particular course of action are not necessarily meaningless stubbornness. Instead, they reflect the belief that revisiting a problem or goal may discover new starting points overlooked. So this still didn't necessarily respond to the root question of why we see this. When we turn to cognitive science, we learned a lot as well. And much of it was about biases, cognitive biases. research suggests that when we process information, we tend to create templates as shortcuts to simplify decision making. We are also not naturally rational, contrary to what many of us like to believe. So these cognitive biases are known as heuristics, and they can also be a cause for the repeat mistakes we see from executives all over the world. There are quite a number of them. Here I'll cover about 8 of them, these heuristics or cognitive biases that we have discovered. The first one, confirmation bias, refers to instances where people search for, interpret, or remember information in a way that confirms their preconceptions or existing beliefs. So we already have a preconceived opinion about something, and we stick to it despite the evidence that may negate it. So this is possibly a cause of repeat mistakes. Yet another bias is the frequency bias. This cognitive bias happens when something you recently learned or been made aware of suddenly appears to be everywhere. It's not that the frequency of that thing has actually increased, rather you just become more aware of it because it's recent and frequent. For executives, this frequency bias can have profound consequences. For example, after launching a new product, a manager might suddenly feel like competitors are also releasing very similar products, even if that isn't statistically the case. They're just more attuned to them. This could, for example, lead managers to cut prices, even if they don't need to, because they fear consumers might turn to competitor products on the market. Status quo bias relates to the fact that as humans, we don't like the change. We prefer things the way they are. And it's in our psychology. This likely stems from our ancestors' need for stability, predictability, and safety in hazardous environments. In the business context, this bias itself is a reluctance to adapt to new methods, technologies, or strategies. Sometimes doing things the old way is the better way, good way, but many times it's not. Yet another human bias we all share is familiarity bias. As the name suggests, we favor things, people, and ideas we are familiar with. We see this type of bias all the time in hiring decisions. Many executives favor candidates from their own backgrounds, their own universities, from companies they know, and with backgrounds similar to their own. In the process, they miss out on talents with more diverse backgrounds and fresh perspectives. We see this familiarity bias a lot when Western companies go abroad. It's the reason more American companies prefer the familiar confines of Europe or Australia or even Singapore and Hong Kong, perhaps, rather than China. They are less keen on less familiar locations. There is the anchoring bias as well. The one that we see often is the sunk cost fallacy. This quite simply refers to what we all know as throwing good money after bad. In the business world, it's a very common trap. Imagine this. You've dedicated months of your life as an executive to crafting a new product, developed a great marketing strategy, but when it launches, it doesn't resonate with consumers. They don't like it. The evidence is negative. Yet driven by the belief that persistence pays off and influenced by all the time and money you invested, you double down, trying to force its success, but ultimately the product fails. So the point is, what's spent is spent. Our choices shouldn't be influenced by our past investment, but be firmly grounded in its current chances of success. The sunk cost fallacy is very common in life as it is in business. It's not only the sunk cost of money, but also we spend our time, our efforts, our emotion, and good judgment on something. And we know that if we now admit defeat, if we say we were wrong, we also put our reputation on the line. And executives are the last people to acknowledge that they made the wrong decision. So this certainly explains the sunk cost bias. The overconfidence bias and ego bias are similar. Overconfidence is an inflated belief in one's own skills. We see this a lot with executives, for example, people who have been in the news. Often, this overconfidence and ego also stand in the way of companies and executives taking the wrong steps and making mistakes and sometimes repeating their mistakes. So what we learned from cognitive bias, cognitive science literature was good. Then we turned to our business advisory board, and as a result of several focus groups with them, very senior people trained in multiple industries and years of experience, we developed some ideas as to root causes of repeat mistakes. So in our discussions, what came up, the pressure under which executives are dealing with. Having to deal with different stakeholders especially was always difficult for them, especially in the face of crisis. They cited also prioritizing some stakeholders over others as a concern, and even said some should stop prioritizing stakeholders instead of the business. In addition, the cultural aspect of managing a winning team often came up very often. How do you promote the right people, encourage employee engagement, communicate priorities, and break down organizational silos? They talked about these as causes and difficulty in managing their teams. So, as a result of these discussions and what we learned from the literature, we came up with 5 root causes. We grouped what we learned, the causes, into 5 big buckets, 5 principal reasons why executives keep making mistakes in today's business environment. So we call this the Olympic model of missteps. The first one is the short-term bias. Executives have long been forced to prioritize short-term profits before long-term strategic investment. This is especially true for publicly held companies, not so much for family-owned businesses. While not new, the trend to shorten tenures at companies means that there is more leadership turnover, therefore lack of accountability for long-term results. So it's normal in this environment that risk is not rewarded, particularly if the risk is associated with long-term investment. I put sunk cost fallacy into this category because I believe that it's rather short-sighted to throw good money after bad. There's also another bias here, the recency bias, self-explanatory perhaps. This simply means that managers tend to pay more attention to the latest trends, ideas, and events while ignoring the bigger long-term picture. The second category, mistakes, is what we can call business as usual bias. At its core, this means sticking to what we know and avoiding change because, well, most of us aren't fans of change. But here's the catch. The world today is like a whirlwind, always changing, full of surprises, often disruptive, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So it's like unpredictable weather. One day it's sunny, and the next there's a thunderstorm. So in this unpredictable environment, clinging to the ways that one knows can be risky is the issue here. Businesses make mistakes by pretending that tomorrow will be just like today, or that another country will be just like theirs. So the third category here is about pressure to be right. This categorization, pressure to be right, captures the essence of some of the biases we talked about. All of them essentially revolve around innate desire to be correct, avoid mistakes, and seek validation in today's high-pressure business environment. The fourth category of causes of mistakes is very much a product of our modern times. As I mentioned before, the inability to manage stakeholders is one of the great causes of mistakes, or at least the very least most visible. And the last category, the fifth one, is an important one, a failure to build a winning culture. We've heard this from the business executives as well as the literature. This spans from communicating priorities to investing in people to succession planning. There's a lot written about culture and organizational culture, its importance, but what we have heard from the executives are talking about, for example, reducing toxicity in some organizations. Some organizations can be quite unproductive or counterproductive or even toxic environments for a variety of reasons, people not getting along, people not being on the same page. And this was a major bottleneck that talked about. So I had also talked to you about the last step of our research, which was this survey of 120 or so business executives spanning several countries, several industries, young and seasoned. We did this to validate whether or not these 5 causes make sense, whether or not we can find evidence to back this model up. We had a good response rate. We found that almost 94% of respondents agreed that these 5 categories of mistakes reflect why leaders tend to repeat missteps. So that level of consensus affirmed the relevance of our framework. Of the more notable results, short-term bias stood out as the most common mistake. So they agreed on the short-term bias, the focus on the short-term rather than long-haul was a major issue. Some 46% of executives ranked it as the top reason for failure. Many pointed to the relentless pressure to deliver immediate results, quarterly earnings, shareholder expectations, and other internal metrics at the expense of long-term goals. This pressure not only creates an environment where risks are avoided, but often drives decisions that lack accountability for future outcomes. The second category, the business as usual bias, was named the leading issue by some 10% of respondents. This represents the tendency to stick to familiar strategies. The pressure to be right was also cited by some 12% of the respondents, reflecting the fear of being wrong in environments where mistakes can feel like career ending. Stakeholder management, while ranked first for only 9% of respondents, gained prominence when we asked about the broader challenges executives face. Many of these business leaders highlighted the growing complexity of managing diverse and often conflicting expectations, especially if they are a multinational company. They're dealing with different cultures, different set of external conditions, and so on. So one participant said, for example, there are concerns about balancing the power and authority of leaders with the right of subordinates to offer criticism. To what extent do you turn to subordinates for insights, for feedback, or do you go with the senior leadership's wisdom in making decisions? Finally, a failure to build a winning culture was ranked as a top cause by 23% of respondents. Culture, or the lack of it, often determines whether mistakes are repeated. Toxic environments, poor communication, misaligned priorities were all cited as significant contributors to organizational failures. As one executive put it, when culture is unhealthy, mistakes multiply. So this also came through very clearly. Then we took the next step, which was obviously the next question to ask the business executives and benefit from their wisdom. Okay, now that we understand, we have a clue as to the root causes of these repeat mistakes. What can we do about it? What can business people do about it? And hopefully educators can blend some of this learning in their teaching as well. So many things came up. Building a more flexible, informed, healthy, engaged, learning-oriented organization was one of them. Building a robust organizational culture was often stated as one solution. There was more discussion of culture. More and more people said culture matters, and they offered suggestions such as having a transparent communication, open and honest dialogue, continuous learning and organizational memory, balancing short and long-term goals, which is always difficult again for publicly owned companies. They also talked about scenario planning. This refers to crisis management, and this is another area where organizations tend to fall short. This is because most leaders aren't really trained in crisis management. They're experts in business strategy, finance, or operations, but not necessarily navigating the chaos of a public relations meltdown, for example, or a product failure. So part of scenario planning is just good business practice. Expect the unexpected, and you'll never be surprised. But part of this is regularly going through full crisis simulation exercise. As one respondent put it, in a crisis, you need calm decision-making, not reactive, knee-jerk reactions, responses. Good leaders think beyond the immediate. And more discussion about, for example, what happened to Boeing with not just their recent failures, but also a series of mistakes that the management has made in that company. Broadening global perspective was a big issue, and this is a weakness of the American executives typically. And as I gave some examples of new market entry by companies, we still see this very, very common. And I can count many stories of companies that fail to understand the importance of studying the new market very carefully. Improving stakeholder relations was also a suggestion. This is a good management practice that can really help the company with their failure to communicate or ignoring stakeholders altogether can cause considerable harm. And this issue has become more important in recent times with the pressures, for example, DEI. With DEI or ESG kinds of mandates, the stakeholders have multiplied. So company executives are not just responding to, let's say, their consumers or their suppliers or their workers, their employees, but they're having to cater to and report to and be responsible to the general public, for example, consumer groups, NGOs, and so on. So it's a complex business environment that they are all facing now. The final suggestion, alignment with long-term goals and vision, is straightforward as well. One executive put it, executives can avoid mistakes by balancing short-term wins with long-term goals, maintaining stability and continuity in critical roles is critical as it ensures consistency over time. So, just to wrap up, in the business world, we all know the adage, to err is to mistake, to make a mistake is human, only human. To blame it on someone else shows management potential. This was kind of interesting response we got from one of the respondents. We asked the CEO how many mistakes he'd made in his career. That was also quite funny. He said, none. I outsourced them all. Blame somebody else, which happens as well a lot. So, joking aside, we examined business mistakes today, but the truth is, if you ask the average executive how many mistakes they made in the last year, you'd probably get an answer closer to zero. Yet slip-ups do happen, and they often don't make the front page. They don't trend on social media or become water cooler talk. Yet they're there impacting our teams, our workflows, and our results. So most executives get to the position they are in by being strong, self-assured, and using both business knowledge and human psychology to get ahead of their peers. It's not for the faint of heart or for those who are not ambitious. It roots out those who lack self-belief. As a result, you often end up with overconfident executives lacking self-awareness, a problem very common today. With proper training, though, some individuals can overcome this lack of self-awareness and their own ingrained paradigms. Perhaps an easier way to address repeated mistakes is to address the organizational cultures in which they take place. Ultimately, our survey found that many of us already know mistakes are inevitable, but learning from them is what sets great leaders and organizations apart. So learning and organizational learning, especially in the context of organizations, executives come and go. So with them, with the departure of executives, some of that wisdom or learnings, experiences disappear. So the continuity is not there, and this becomes problematic as well. That's why it's important to have this organizational memory, somehow capture the learnings and share it, disseminate it throughout the organization. So to leave you on a high note, for every story we heard of today, executive mistakes, there are thousands of examples of those that got it right but never made the newspaper or the management textbooks. There are also many instances where executives learn from their mistakes and grow through them. In fact, the best organizational cultures I've seen throughout my career is ones that encourage managers to take risks, even reward for them. Let me stop there and see if there are any comments or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Cavusgil. I've got a question, if I could launch off. How do you feel in your surveys, cultural sensitivities and different ethnicities play into the results that you had researched?
I mean, this is one reason why I think board of directors and senior executive CEOs and so on would like to create a multi-cultural environment. European companies do this better. When we ask the question of, what makes the company truly global, typically the answer would be, well, what percentage of sales are going to multiple countries or regions, geographies, and so on. But a better way is to look at actually the composition of the board of directors, starting with the board of directors, then senior management, right? Who are they? Are they all people coming from the same background, same ethnicity, same culture? If so, then, I don't think we're benefiting from diversity. That diversity brings innovation, new ideas, fresh perspectives, and also it serves as a checks and balances. So we're seeing more companies think along those lines and create multicultural, multi-ethnic, especially in their senior management ranks. Say, for example, what differentiates a company like Unilever or Nestle from Coca-Cola? When you look at the Coca-Cola they're changing also. They are based in Atlanta, so I interact with them. I learn a lot from them, and we share some results with them as well. But it's still pretty American. I mean, when you look at it, the board of directors and also seniors, it's still pretty American, whereas some of the European companies, I think, better represent that diversity. Hopefully that answered your question.
In your earlier slide, you had equifinality. Do you think that there is a need for accountability or even a spectrum of that to be considered?
Yeah, just to remind our audience here, phenomenon of doing the same but expecting different result. Again, that's human nature, and I think you avoid it by being fairly disciplined about and fairly thoughtful about decisions. The problem is often decisions have to be made hastily, quickly, in some cases anyway. And so you don't have the benefit of thinking broadly and weighing all the evidence. Maybe you act too soon without looking at the evidence, and you run into this problem. It's also human nature that you don't want to give up, right? You may have explanations saying that, well, it was the wrong time, the timing was wrong. For whatever reason, our product didn't succeed in the market because competition introduced the same product. So we will do the same thing again. So I think that tendency is always there for executives, believing that they know they can succeed because things have changed, and they're a little bit more confidence, overconfident and stubborn, perhaps, about their ability to make the right decisions.
Could I open the floor for any questions you may have?
Thank you for the inspiring talk.
Oh, thank you.
I actually have two questions. The first one is that according to what I heard, what I learned, the context for the research is about the multinationals in the American context, right? So, but you have this Olympic framework of cognitive bias. So, would it actually extend it to the other contexts? For example, SMEs and also hybrid organizations, even for the nonprofit organizations. And the second question is, I'm not really familiar with the cognitive series, honestly, but I believe that people's mindset would evolve over time, right? For example, the executive's mindset changed over time, especially after made the mistake.
Yeah, hopefully, we learn from it, right? I mean, and we get better, and we're more cautious, and we question more. And we open up also. Sometimes this overconfidence bias is a big hurdle. We think we know the solution, we know the market, we know the customer, we know what they want. So this overconfidence, but learning from mistakes, I think, is a big part of it, and consulting others, actually building a smart team, putting smart people around you and asking them for input and feedback is, it sounds common sense, right? But often executives fail to do that. They feel that they already know the answer, so they won't bother. Or they're under time pressure. There are knee-jerk reactions, and they say the wrong thing, they make the wrong stuff. So I think lack of learning and lack of self-awareness and humility, I think, is something also a good trait for business people. I mean, saying or acknowledging that we don't know it all. Let's consult other people. Let's surround ourselves with smart people, people with different backgrounds, whether it's functional background or cultural background, and learn from them. So what we've seen, for example, I'm reminded of what happened in Korea last week, right? I guess one thing we learned, don't make decisions midnight. Wait until the morning, right? And consult a few people. That was kind of remarkable. And even senior leaders like that can make those mistakes. Your first question was about what are the other types of organizations. These results apply more to larger companies and publicly owned companies. And this is where I think privately owned firms benefit because they do have the long-term perspective, so they don't have to be short-sighted in their investment decisions or other types of activities. The small companies that you mentioned, SMEs, well, are they just as likely to make mistakes? I think so, if they kind of represent this kind of thinking, this kind of biases that we talked about. Small companies, though, the price they pay for wrong missteps is relatively small, right? I mean, if you're a big company like Boeing and you do the wrong things and you say the wrong things, reputation really suffers, and it's very difficult to rebuild reputation. But if you're a small company, I think toleration is probably expectation that, they were a small company, they were not surrounded with the resources or, lots of people helping out as a team with the decision. So people can forgive them better. But I think overall business people are all susceptible to making repeat mistakes. It's just that, the environment that you find yourself in, what kind of people you have to consult, for example. Then there's the other types of organizations, state-owned enterprises, for example, which we see a lot in China as well. That's another story. Hopefully that responded.
Thank you, Professor Cavusgil.